Hello and welcome to Political Dharma. I'm Alan Zundell, and in this video I am answering the question, what is important about a non-major party presidential candidate getting 5% of the popular vote in November, or better than 5%? What's so important about that? Now, often minor party candidates will raise the argument to potential supporters that if they can get at least 5% of the vote in the presidential election, this will help establish their party more securely for the future. And they will, give the indication that it's not just going to be you voted for us and it's done and it didn't help at all, but that 5% is somehow important in getting them other benefits. This argument has also been made by independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. this year, when he suspended his campaign and supported Donald Trump originally. He was still trying to get people to vote for him in the non-swing states so that his new party, the We the People Party, could get 5% of the vote or better. And the argument was made that this would help that party be established for the next presidential election. Now, what exactly are the benefits of getting 5% of the presidential vote? Well, three of the things that are often mentioned are: does getting 5% of the popular vote in the presidential election make a party an officially recognized party? People have asked that, and they use different terms, like it makes it a real party or it makes it somehow a legal party. But the answer to that is sort of. Yes, in some ways, no, in some ways. And that is because the second question asks, can it get a candidate or party public funding in the next presidential election? The answer to that is yes. And that's why the federal government would be recognizing that party, because they got 5% of the vote or more, and that recognition would mean they qualify for public funding. Now, will it get a candidate or party ballot access in the next presidential election? And the answer to that is no, because the ballot access issue is settled by state law, not federal law, and none of the states make getting 5% of the national vote a requirement or a qualification for getting on their ballot. Okay, so tentative answer to those is yes and no for whether it gets a party officially recognized by law, and the yes is in the federal government recognizing them for public funding, and the no is for state parties recognizing a party to get ballot access in the next presidential election. I'm going to tackle the public funding angle first, since that is the affirmative answer to the question and what it does get them. The Presidential Election Campaign Fund was established in 1966, and you see here the Senate version of that act way back in 1966, in which the taxpayer could check off a box and donate a certain amount of money to this fund, and it would be used to help candidates for public office. And the idea was to help them break free of the reliance on corporations and private individuals, rich private individuals, to run their campaigns for president. So they set up this fund, and in subsequent legislation, they amended the fund and changed it in different ways. So today, the fund is run by the Federal Election Commission, often referred to as the FEC, and you see a page from their website, if you're watching the video, where it talks about this public funding and what kind of funding it gives them. Under the Presidential Public Funding Program, eligible presidential candidates receive federal government funds to pay for the qualified expenses of their political campaigns in both the primary and the general elections. Now, those are all important qualifiers in there. Eligible presidential candidates means you have to establish some kind of eligibility for the funds, and qualified expenses means that you can only spend the funds on particular designated expenses. In the primary election, the fund can give matching funds for the first $250 of each individual contribution during the primary campaign to a candidate, to an eligible candidate. That means they get matching funds up to $250, but that's only for campaign contributions for real individuals and not political action committees or anything like that. And it will also fund the major party nominees' general election campaigns up to a certain amount, but there's restrictions on that, such as they have to limit their spending to just those funds, and assist eligible minor party nominees. Now, that eligibility part is important because that's where the 5% comes in. Now, for that first part, the matching funds in the primary campaign, it has absolutely nothing to do with getting 5% in the presidential election. The qualification for a candidate to get public funding in the primary is that they have to be seeking the nomination of a political party, and that party doesn't have to be a recognized party, as I'll show you in a minute, and also shows broad support from the public for their campaign. They show that kind of support by raising at least $5,000 in each of at least 20 states, but they only count the first $250 of each contribution. And those contributions, again, have to be from individual people, not from PACs, political action committees. Have any candidates been able to get this? Well, the answer to that is yes. Jill Stein was the most recent one back in 2016. Here, this is from the Open Secrets website. In 2016, Jill Stein, the candidate of the Green Party, which was not a federally recognized party for the purposes of the general election funding. You see there, she took federal funds to the tune of about $450,000. But this can be very risky for a campaign because the funds have to be spent on designated expenses, and they do an audit. This audit for Jill Stein in 2016 came after the election was over, and they found that she had spent some of the funds to seek the nomination of a minor party in California, the Peace and Freedom Party. But since she had already been nominated the candidate of the Green Party at their national convention earlier in the year, the Federal Elections Commission said none of that money was that we gave after the Green Party convention was money you should have been spending for seeking the nomination of the Peace and Freedom Party in California. So you have to pay it back. And that was it was over $100,000. I forget the exact amount. I covered this earlier in the year. Anyway, so there's qualifications on how you use those funds and how the matching funds work. But Jill Stein got matching funds in 2016. In 2012, Jill Stein of the Green Party, Terry Randall of the Constitution Party, who is also running again this year, and Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party all accepted matching funds in their primary campaigns, and none of those parties was qualified or recognized by the federal government according to any formula based on 5% of the vote. So the matching funds don't have to do with getting 5% in the general election in the previous year. Any candidate seeking the nomination of a party who is able to show that broad support according to that specific formula. Now, they do qualify for general election funds if they get that 5% or better. And here's where it becomes important how the Federal Elections Commission is going to recognize your party. You see here that a major party, in their definition, means a political party whose candidate for the office of president in the preceding presidential election received 25% or more of the total number of popular votes. And that will get them a big grant of money. The minor party is, I'll read it here. Minor party means a political party whose candidate for the office of president in the preceding general election received, as a candidate of such party, 5% or more, but less than 25% of the total number of popular votes received by all candidates. This is where the 5% or better comes in. You qualify as a minor party in the eyes of the Federal Elections Commission in the next election for receiving money for your general election campaign. Now, that's apart from the primary campaign, right? And finally, they have a definition of a new party, which means a political party which is neither a major party nor a minor party according to their definitions, not according to any state laws, but according to the Federal Elections Commission's definitions that you see here, which would mean that a new party could be an actual new party like Kennedy's We the People Party, which was just established, I think this year or maybe late last year, or Cornel West's Justice for All Party, or it can mean the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, which have been around for decades, but not recognized in the preceding election as a minor party because they didn't get 5% or better of the vote in that preceding election. So what do these each get? Here's another page from the Federal Elections Commission's website. Major party nominees in the general election, they get a grant, and the grant in the 2024 presidential election would be $123.5 million. Now, no major party nominee has accepted that money since 2008 when Obama decided he was not going to accept that money because of the restrictions that apply, primarily that they can only spend that money and they can't raise any money beyond that for the expenses of the presidential election, which have grown phenomenally, as you're probably aware. So they don't want to be limited to having just that money. They can go out and raise plenty of money from corporations and PACs and wealthy individuals. So that's the general election for major party candidates, and you have to get 25% of the vote or better in the previous election, and then you qualify for this. But neither the major parties, which would be the Democrats and Republicans receiving at least 25% of the vote, are taking that grant. Now, minor party candidates down here, you see near the bottom, the amount of public funding to which a minor party candidate is entitled is based on the ratio of the party's popular vote in the preceding presidential election to the average popular vote of the two major party candidates in that election. So they compare how the two major parties did and add them together, divided by 2, and that gives you a amount of how much of the vote the major parties got together on average. And then you say, well, how much of the vote did the minor party get compared to that? And then they get a proportion of that 123.5 million that's the same as the ratio of their vote to the major party vote. So this could be a big chunk of money, in the millions anyway, so tens of millions most likely. So they can get a big chunk of money for the next election if they get that 5% or vote or better, and that's really what they're aiming at when they do that. Now, the other thing down here is a new party candidate, which is one that has not been recognized by the Federal Elections Commission as a minor party by receiving more than 5% or 5% or more in the preceding election. So they didn't get that, but they can receive partial public funding by the same kind of ratio after the election if they receive 5% or more of the vote in this election, which means that if they did not get it in last election, which would cover a lot of parties, like the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the We the People Party or the Justice for All Party, any one of these parties that didn't get that 5% last time around, if they get 5% or better this time around, after the general election's over, they can get some money to replace the money they spent, which would help them pay off campaign debts and maybe bank that money for the party for future elections, right? Future presidential elections. So that can help even a party that didn't receive it in the last election. So if the We the People Party was able to get 5% or more this time around, not only would they qualify for funds next time around, but they get some funds for retrospectively for this election. So that's the benefit of getting 5% or more of the vote. So what about ballot access? Now, ballot access is not in the hands of the federal government. It is in the hands of the states, and this is true of just about all elections are run by the states rather than the federal government. And in the case of the election for the president, according to the Constitution, the president is elected by the Electoral College, and the composition of the electors from each state is determined by each of those states. You see here in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which is the article that talks about the presidency, Section 1, the second paragraph there says, each state shall appoint in such a manner as the legislature there may direct, that is the state legislature, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. So they get a certain number of electors that depends on how many, each state has 2 senators, so 2 plus how many representatives they have in the House of Representatives, that's the same number of electors they get. And the state legislature can, by law, determine how those electors are going to be chosen. Now, early in the country's history, the state legislature would simply come together and debate and talk and form caucuses and then vote on who the electors were going to be. And whichever party had a majority, were going to elect people that are affiliated with that party. But later on, the states started making the choice of electors open to the public indirectly by holding a public election, and the results of that election would determine who got the electors, which party got the electors in the electoral college from that state. So essentially the parties got to choose them if they got the most votes in the state. That's how most of the states do it anyway, almost all of them. The only thing that the U.S. Congress determines about this is, you see down there later, Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, and which day shall be the same throughout the United States. So that's what the Congress is limited to. When are those electors going to be chosen, and when are those electors going to vote as an electoral college to actually choose the president and vice president? The only other time the federal government gets involved in ballot access questions is when a case in a state is challenging a ballot access decision, either that a candidate has been given ballot access or has been denied ballot access by the state. That case might go to the state courts and then end up in the federal courts if there is a constitutional question that arises during this. Now, most recently, we saw this earlier this year when a case in Colorado, the state there decided that Donald Trump was not going to be eligible to be on the ballot, and there was a lawsuit, and it ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court, and they determined that, yes, that state had to put Donald Trump on the ballot as the nominee of the Republican Party. So that's the only times that the federal government's involved in ballot access. Number one, Congress determines the time and place of choosing the electors, and then when the electors vote, and when the federal courts get involved in a ballot access case. Those are the only times. So how do the states determine which parties or candidates get ballot access for the general election in November? Well, that's a matter of state law, and these states are all over the map on this. They're very different from each other, but none of them makes the decision contingent on how much of a percentage of the national vote any candidate or party got in the previous election. They usually have some combination of how much of a percentage of the vote a candidate got for president or for another office in that state in a previous election, or how many registered voters have signed up with that particular, to affiliate with that particular party. That is, the percentage of people who register for one party versus all the voters or all the parties registered as party members. Variations on that, I think, as well. And sometimes it has to do with how many signatures on a petition the party is able, or candidate is able to get. So they're very different. Now I'm going to give you two examples that show the differences that can crop up on this. And as I said, they're very different across the states. Now, Oregon, which I'm familiar with because I lived there almost 20 years, 18 years, and was involved in politics there. It's a fairly lenient system. On the other hand, I'm going to show you California, in which the presidential vote doesn't give you a thing. So Oregon, first of all, getting 5% or any percent of the vote in a previous election is not going to get you on the ballot initially, but if you can get a number of signatures on a petition, you will be able to become a minor party to start with. Now, this year, Kennedy's We the People Party was able to be recognized as a minor party by the state of Oregon by gathering enough signatures on petitions by voters to reach the total of over 29,294. Now, that's not a heck of a lot of people, even though Oregon has a relatively small population. So it's a relatively small number of voters, and getting on the ballot initially is not that hard. But to maintain ballot access, what you need is one of several things. Here you see from the party manual put out by the Oregon Secretary of State, there's different ways to maintain that ballot access status. First of all, you can have registered party members equal to at least a quarter of all registered voters in Oregon. Number two, you can have registered party members equal to at least 0.1% of all votes cast for governor in the across the state, really. Or here's the final one. This one, 2B. At least once in a 4-year period, total votes cast for a party candidate are equal to at least 1% of all votes cast for the office of U.S. President, U.S. Senator, Governor, Secretary of State, State Treasurer, or Attorney General. So in a 4-year period, if that party is able to get 1% of the votes for U.S. President or any of these other offices, they're able to maintain their ballot status for the next presidential election because it's 4 years later, right? So if they get at least 1% of the votes for U.S. President this year, they'll be on the ballot. Their party will have a candidate on the ballot, or at least they'll be able to put a candidate on the ballot 4 years from now. Now, if a candidate for president is able to get 5% of the vote nationally, that means they're very likely to get at least 1% of the vote in the state of Oregon. Not necessarily, but you would expect they would be. So this is pretty easy. If a candidate's able to get 5% of the vote, they're probably going to be able to get on the ballot in Oregon next time around, and I expect the We the People Party will be around 4 years from now. But California is a whole different picture. In California, where I live now, here's from the state elections code. It's section 5151, if you want to look it up. It's a little longer than I'm showing on your screen, but this is the section that is important. 5151B1. At the last preceding gubernatorial primary election, that is the election for governor, the sum of the votes cast for all candidates for an office voted on throughout the state who disclosed a preference for that party on the ballot was at least 2% of the entire vote in the state for that office. Now, when you first read this, you might think, okay, that sounds kind of similar to Oregon. If any statewide office the party was able to get, or the candidate of the party was able to get at least 2%, so if they did 5% nationally, maybe they could do 2% or better in California, they would be able to get on the presidential ballot next time. No, that's not right, because it says at the gubernatorial primary election, and the election for governor in California only happens in the off years when the president is not up for election. That is, this year, the president election is 2024. So in California, the election of governor was 2 years ago in 2022 and will be next time 2 years from now in 2026. So in either case, you're not going to have a presidential vote counting to get you on the ballot in California. But in California, the only ballot access that a party really has that's available to a party is to get the presidential candidate on the ballot. All the other offices are held in a top two primary system, which means the two candidates in the primary election who got the most votes are the candidates on the general election ballot, no matter who those candidates are, whether they're a minor party candidate, major party candidate, or an independent candidate. And to get on the primary ballot, they all qualify in the same way, or at least the qualifications are the same for all of them. It is some combination of paying a filing fee and or getting a certain number of petitions on a signature. So presidential election here doesn't mean a thing as far as ballot access in California. So those are two very different, and the other states, there's variation as well. But the key point here is that 5% of the vote for president doesn't automatically get you ballot access anywhere, although it might indicate that it's going to help you get ballot access in particular states, at least those states in which a candidate's party has qualified for the ballot already and is able to get more than a certain percentage of votes. And in some states, it's much higher than 1 or 2%. A few of those states, it's like 10% or more. Okay, one other thing I wanted to cover in this, I hope that was all fairly clear, is how many people have actually achieved this. So let's look at all the candidates in the last 100 years, candidates for president, who have actually achieved more than 2% of the popular vote for president in those elections. And let's pull it up here. And what we find is that there are 10 candidates in the last 100 years who got more than 2% of the popular vote for president, and only half of those, that is 5 candidates in the last 100 years, got 5% or better. Reading backwards here, from the top down, but backwards in time. Last time was that anyone other than a major party candidate got better than 2%. Was in 2016. Gary Johnson, the candidate of the Libertarian Party, got 3.3% of the vote. And he was very well known because he had previously held office as a governor. So even he didn't get up to 5% or better. In 2000, the race, many of you will remember either because you were around or you read about it in your history. Ralph Nader, who was the candidate of the Green Party, which was just getting off the ground, got 2.7% of the vote. In 1996, Ross Perot, running as the candidate of the Reform Party, he beat the 5% threshold at 8.4%. And in 1992, Ross Perot, again running as an independent, beat it even better at 18.9% of the vote, the highest of all these candidates. Going back to 1980, you had John Anderson, an independent candidate who had been a Republican congressman, got 6.6%. 1968, George Wallace, the candidate of the American Independent Party, who was a Democratic governor of Alabama, got 13.5% of the vote. And back in 1948, Strom Thurmond of the States' Rights Democratic Party, which was separate from the Democratic Party, just like George Wallace, the issue here was a Southern Democrat breaking off from the party over the issue of civil rights and forming a different party. He got 2.4% of the vote, and Henry Wallace of the Progressive Party, as well as the American Labor Party, got 2.4% of the vote as well. That same election year of 1948. Actually, Henry Wallace got a little bit less. I think it was about 2.37, whereas Strom Thurmond was about 2.41, something like that. Anyway, they each did not break that 5% threshold. 1932, Norman Thomas, the Socialist Party candidate, got 2.2%. And then in 1924, Robert La Follette, who was also a former congressperson, and I think he had been governor in Wisconsin as well. He was the candidate of the Progressive Party and the Socialist Party and the Farmer Labor Party, three parties, and he got 16.6% of the vote. So as you can see from that, our takeaway is that it ain't easy because of our two-party system, and I will do another video of that at some point coming up, why it is so hard to get a minor party to get very many votes, or an independent candidate either. Usually independent candidates do better than minor party candidates just because of the term independent. Voters like that. But it's a two-party system for specific reasons that I'll get to in another video. And it's very hard to break that 5% threshold. Only 5 candidates in the last 100 years got better than 5%, and only 10 got better than 2%. So the odds are not good for you getting that public funding, although they'll keep trying and they'll keep using that as an incentive to vote. And maybe at some point one of them will succeed because others have done it in the past. It is possible. It is just difficult given our electoral system. So that is my presentation on why it's important for candidates who are not major party candidates to get 5% or better of the presidential vote, primarily because it gets them public funding for their general election campaign, both this time around and 4 years from now, next time around for that party. That's it. I should say one thing else. I'm not sure if I emphasized this or if I even mentioned it when I was talking about new parties. A candidate who gets 5% of the vote can apply that to whatever party they want the next time around. So that party can either be a brand new party or it can be a currently existing party. Say Robert F. Kennedy Jr. gets 5% of the vote this time around. Well, 4 years from now, he can decide that vote goes to the We the People Party or the American Independent Party, where he was on the ballot in California, or whatever party he wants. He could even give it to, I don't know, he wouldn't need to give it to the Democratic or Republican parties because they have automatic ballot access. Another interesting point that I skipped over was in Oregon. Remember I said you only needed 1% of the statewide vote to get on the ballot next time around. But to become a major party, you only need 5% of the vote, which is what happened to the Independent Party in Oregon a few years ago. They broke that 5% threshold and thus became a major party by state law. And that didn't help them getting public funding. They didn't even run national candidates. but it did help them, but I'm not sure if it helped or not, but they had to be part of the primary process than the state-run primary process. Anyway, that's it for today. That's more than enough, I'm sure. Thanks for watching, and this weekend I will be checking in this weekend, which I'm filming this in September, September 11th. Oh, this is the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Hadn't thought about that too much, although I did see news items earlier today. Anyway, my heart goes out to the survivors of that and the people who had loved ones who were hurt during that. But this weekend, I'm going to be doing my usual update on how the presidential race is going for those candidates who are not major party candidates. Thanks again for watching, and